Good morning, friends. It's good to see you with us this morning. If you're a guest or a visitor, thank you for being here. My name is Chris. I'm one of the ministers here. If there's any way that I can serve you or be of help, let me know. I'm glad you're here. Matthew chapter 4, beginning in verse 23. And Jesus went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pain, those oppressed by demons, and those having seizures and paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis, and from Jerusalem and Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. And seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them. Here, Jesus is beginning his ministry, and he's quickly gaining this large following. It says that people from all over this region are flocking to him in what sounds like enormous numbers. And this passage gives us a great little snapshot of why. Why are people chasing Jesus? It says because they have family or they have loved ones who are sick with all sorts of ailments, and they need a healer. Someone who's powerful, someone mighty, someone who's compassionate, who genuinely cares, and maybe most importantly, someone who can actually deliver. No snake oil, no hollow promises, no smoke and mirrors, but actual healing and freedom. And the rumors are that this Jesus of Nazareth lives up to the billing. And so people from far away come here to find him. And the location is so important. It says that he, Jesus, went throughout all of Galilee. Now, when we think of Galilee, we often think of this large lake, and there is a big lake. This is part of it. But it's more than that. It's the towns and the villages and the empty spaces in between that all kind of surround this beautiful lake. It is beautiful, but it's also very smart. Jesus is making a few very strategic decisions by beginning his ministry in the Galilee. First of all, it is a central location where news about Jesus can spread virally. He can visit lots of people in a relatively short amount of time by foot or by boat. And this way, he can personally interact with people, face-to-face contact. Those who hear about him and see him will have actually met Jesus themselves. But then also, because of the close proximity of all these little towns around the lake, as well as water and foot trade and travel, even if Jesus isn't still in a particular place, the citizens of that town will talk and share their experiences with passersby about this strange rabbi who came to their town and did amazing things. Second, this is a strategic place for Jesus to begin his ministry because he's being very specific about his audience. These villages around the Sea of Galilee, Magdala, Capernaum, Tiberias, Bethsaida, Gennesaret, they are all home to good, hardworking, salt-of-the-earth kind of folks. Now, that's not to say that there isn't wealth in the area, but your average citizen in this district is not going to be rich. And Jesus knows his audience, and he picks his audience, and then he tailors his message appropriately. His teaching style is very accessible. It's easy for anyone to understand, and that's evident by the way that he blends in these parables about sheep and farming and fish and seeds and family and what it's like to get a little speck of sawdust in your eye. But this region is also very uniquely diverse as well. When you read through the Gospels and you hear about Jesus traveling around this Galilee region, you'll notice a specific phrase comes up from time to time, and that phrase is actually very meaningful. It's the phrase, they crossed over to the other side. And when you're reading through the Gospels and you read that phrase, they crossed over to the other side, that is a signal to readers that Jesus is leaving one area that is a Jewish community, and he's going to a non-Jewish community. You see, for the Sea of Galilee, there was the Jewish side, the western side of the lake, and then there was the other side, where Gentiles or non-practicing Jews would live. And his original audience would have been very perplexed by this behavior. His original audience knew him as a Hebrew rabbi, a holy man. He's clean, he's righteous. He would have no place going to the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. Because not only were there unclean people on the other side, but they weren't God's chosen people. Why would you waste your time visiting them? And doing this would hurt Jesus's credibility in certain circles. But the trade-off that he was willing to make is that it would also open doors wide to a certain group who was desperate, who were hungering and thirsting for righteousness. You see, Jesus knew what he was doing. His message of hope and redemption and love and salvation wasn't just for the elite, but it was for common people, your everyday average Joe. And he wasn't only targeting Israelites, but all people. As was prophesied about Jesus when he was just a baby, Luke 2:32, he would be a light of revelation to the Gentiles. He chose this place and these people on purpose. Jesus was and still is for everybody. And then third, let's look back and compare Matthew 4:23 and 5 verse 1. It says, he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. But then, seeing the crowds, he went up to the mountain. Jesus was strategic in delivering his message. This big opening Sermon on the Mount message, not in a synagogue, as he had been doing, but on a hillside. And in doing so, Jesus showed people that God was not trapped in the building. Pictured here is the Sermon Mount. There you go. Is the Sermon Mount. This is the site that's recognized and commemorates the Sermon on the Mount. It's not really near any towns. There aren't any ancient ruins scattered about. It's just out there in the open by the sea. The scenery is beautiful. It's peaceful. It's comfortable. And it was here, or near here, that Jesus seized the opportunity that he had, not in a synagogue, not in a temple, but just out there on this simple hillside. He sat down, he opened his mouth, and he taught. And they have been seeking him thus far to be a healer. He's a compassionate soul, and he has miraculous ability to heal, to restore, to free the afflicted. But with this message, Jesus makes it clear that seeking him is more than just caring for the flesh. Seeking him is about reconnecting with your Creator, with your Heavenly Father, the way that you were always supposed to be. And that proper orientation, that spiritual orientation with God and man together in unity and harmony as intended, can be heard throughout his message. He says, you are blessed when you mourn and when you're meek and when you have to make peace at your own expense, or when you are persecuted. Why? None of those sound good. None of those sound like a blessing. But his truth is that when we are in those positions, It opens your heart, and it makes you more receptive to God. And that's the blessing, because you will be comforted, and you will be satisfied, and you will be shown mercy, and you shall see God. And he says, you are salt, and you are the light of the world. He's saying, you have a purpose, a good and wonderful purpose. He says, don't lose your saltiness. Don't hide your light. Don't neglect your life's God-given meaning to deliver something beautiful to the people around you. When you are living into that purpose, those who are around you will be pointed to their Creator too. And that's a great life. It may not be the most glamorous, and it's not always going to be comfortable, but it's rich, and it's substantial, and it's lasting. And what about righteousness? Jesus says, chapter 5, verse 24, I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, Jesus does not throw out the law, that moral, spiritual code. He says that he has come to fulfill it, not to abolish it. But he says it has been improperly applied. You see, the scribes and the Pharisees, they are the example of that day. They are the standard in that time of holy, righteous living. They perform a righteousness that is technically accurate. They execute the law to the letter. But Jesus says that's not really enough. Your righteousness needs to surpass them. And it's not that it's not enough in the sense of you need to be doing more, but rather you can do better. He gives some examples. He starts with just the highest, easiest thing. He says, you have heard it said, do not murder. That should be a given. Not to murder. This is nothing new. They can obey that and technically be righteous. That is, following the rules. But you can do that and still not have God. But if you want more, if you want God, if you want to be spiritually connected to your Creator as you were meant to be, not killing is not enough. It's not going to draw you near to Him. And so Jesus asks, how's your heart? Are you angry with your brother or sister? And that distraction, that fixation of the heart on anger, that's going to keep God at arm's length. And that's going to keep righteousness out of reach. And he says the same for adultery. He says, cheating on your spouse, you've heard it said, don't do that. That's a given. But where's your heart? Where are your eyes? Where is your mind? Are you seeking to be righteous only in deed, but also, or only in deed, or also in spirit? A righteousness in deed is a self-righteousness. I can do this, or I am expected to do this all on my own. But a righteousness of the heart exceeds the righteousness of the scribes or the Pharisees. How? Because it depends on God. That relationship, that closeness, it is going to shape my deeds. I will behave more morally, but not in a way that makes me proud or arrogant, but a way that is honest and has to admit that I deserve no credit. That righteousness has to admit a corruption of the self and gives all the praise and the glory to God. That is a fuller righteousness, not only in flesh, but also in soul, reconnected and reconciled with a loving Creator. And this is the righteousness. This righteousness is not just limited to a performance in a building, in a synagogue or a temple or a church. This is a righteousness that we live everywhere, out there in the big, wide open world. This is a righteousness that depends on God for the normal, boring, common, ordinary, everyday things like my daily bread. And it also depends on God for the really complicated and challenging, difficult things of life, like being forgiving as He is forgiving, protection from temptation, and deliverance from the evil one. There on the Sermon Mount, by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus picks the people, the place, and the purpose to introduce himself very strategically. He is a healer, but he's not only a healer. He's not only a rabbi. He is someone who personally knows God intimately and eternally. And you hear it in the way that he begins his model prayer. He addresses God as Father. But not only his Father, he prays, our Father, your Father. This Jesus of Nazareth knows God as Dad. And then he invites his audience to know him that way too. And now this sermon is just an intro. Jesus has much more to do and to say and to teach and to demonstrate. But this is how he begins on purpose. This sermon has endured for thousands of years. But every time you read it, there might be some new passage that just hits a little different. A verse that you've never quite looked at or heard the same way before. Not with your ears, not with your eyes, but with your heart and your soul, as if God was speaking words of encouragement or peace or challenge directly to you. And I think that's wonderful for so many great reasons. But generally speaking, I think that's wonderful because I think that was Jesus's plan to begin with. I think that was part of his original intent, for this message to be with you, wherever you are, out there in the open, in your real daily life. And that's why I love reading this passage as we have this morning, and we will continue this morning to read the entire message, the entire Sermon on the Mount, because wherever you are today, whatever weight or baggage or wounding or energy or excitement that you came in here this morning carrying, Jesus has something to tell you in this sermon for your real daily life. Today, he wants to sit down with you, to open his mouth, and to teach you something. May we have ears to hear. If there's any way that this church family can serve you this morning, you have an opportunity to respond up front or in the back as we stand and sing.